What's going on? It's Coach T. That's what I'm going to call myself from now on. My first name is Travis, but I'm a coach, I'm a teacher, and I feel like Coach T kind of fits the whole shtick of what I'm trying to do with these quick code videos, which is coach adult or maybe adolescent learners who are struggling with the foundations of programming in Python and maybe eventually C# if I feel comfortable enough in it, to help them get started on their own. There's a whole lot that you need to learn, and there's a whole lot of ways that you can just wash up on the rocks, and I know that because that's exactly what happened to me last year. In 2023 in July, I was like, let's learn C#, let's learn Unity, let's do some goof around video game projects. And I didn't have the background knowledge or the means to really learn, which was frustrating for me for a bunch of different reasons, but I backed up, I took a couple months off, I came back to it, and since January of 2024, I have been coding every single day in SQL, Python, or C#. And I've learned a whole bunch, and the point of these videos is for me to learn by teaching, but also hopefully to provide some support for maybe people like you. So if you like that, you can consider subscribing in those doodads. But ultimately, these videos are there as a helper, and I have nothing to sell you. I just want to help. So in this video, we're going to look at functions, which are a major tool in Python that lets you reuse code without having to write it over and over again. So it literally takes it can take a long program and shorten it, which is really cool. They're super useful, and once you get in the habit of using functions, you're going to want to use them like all the time. You can use functions inside of classes or outside of classes. They have slightly different names, but the idea is this allows you to compress or really like isolate out calculations or functions that you're going to do over and over and over again and just call it once right when you need it. There it is. There are a couple of key components to writing a function. Without these, the key components, they will not work. So I'm going to point those out really quickly. The goal, as always, is to keep this below 8 minutes. Who knows? We have the def keyword. That tells Python that you are defining something, a new function probably. We have the function name, which we're going to do in Pascal case, which means it's a capital N, a capital F, and then we have two parentheses, and that tells Python this isn't a variable or anything like that. Here is something that we are going to be executing code in. And finally, we have the colon, and the colon basically says, okay, we have the definition keyword, we have the function name, we've got the parentheses, which could contain something, and I'm going to come back to that in a second. We have a colon. Now we're ready for the body of our code. And just keep in mind that any comments within the function need to be indented. Just like with an if-then statement or a switch case statement, you need to make sure that everything is indented at the same level. That could be 4 spaces, it could be a tab, however you do that. But they all need to be the same. If it's not indented, it's going to start throwing errors. Okay, so we have the definition keyword, the function name, parentheses, colon, and then we've indented our last key component, which is a command. The command tells the function to do something. You don't have to have a return statement, because just like a regular program, a function is kind of a micro program within your software. When it reaches the end of the function, it will end it, right? And then it goes back to whatever it was that Python was doing. So let's write a really quick program here and call this function. All I'm going to do this is write new function. I'm not passing any arguments right now. And let's see, I don't think I need to do anything else. Let's try to run this really quickly and see what happens. We're going to debug the Python file. I'm going to close that. And look, I got the well hello there. So what happens in this really brief program, this literal one-line program, because I can shrink this, is it starts Python, it moves down to the first line that it sees, it says we're calling the new function, or we're invoking it, and go to new function, wherever that's defined in my program, or possibly in a side file that I've imported, which I have not covered in the quick code videos, and then execute whatever is in the new function, which is just this print statement. It reaches the end of that, it returns back to the code, and then it continues to execute, or in this case, there's nothing else there, so it just ends, right? Python runs out of stuff to do. So we could even lock this in a while loop to demonstrate this, right? While true, we're going to lock it in a loop. there's nothing here to act upon. So it's just going to go, okay, while this is true, we're going to call new function over and over again. And if we understand how this works, I'm now in an infinite loop, and I'm going to Obi-Wan Kenobi the hell out of this. So look at this. Well, hello there, right? It's just going to keep calling it over and over and over again. You don't want that to happen. So we could do a couple different things, but that's probably outside the scope of this video. What I want to look at now, because this is just a regular function call, it returns no value to the program, right? Let me show you what I mean. My nose itches because we just got out of swimming all day. If I have variable equals 5, right? And in here, I have variable equals 10. And then I call my function. Is it going to, we'll do a print var, right? If we're thinking programmatically, we're trying to figure out how do these pieces interact, the variables and the functions. I start off with var defined at 5. I'm going to pause real quick. Okay, I'm back. I just sneezed so hard my hair's sticking up now. So I've got my variable defined with the value of 5, and then I've got my new function call, and inside new function I have variable 10. So if we don't understand how these parts are related, we might think that variable here is going to get printed at 10. But is that going to happen? Nope, it's still just 5. And that's because I did not return a value back to the program. So here is this return statement, right? That's one of the optional components. I could say return var. And now, if I run my program, I'm going to start with variable with a value of 5. Then I call my function new function 5. It says variable is 10, return variable. Will that work? Let's find out. Nope. Okay, so why didn't it work? Well, even though I'm returning a value, what is the value being fed into right here? Or is this just saying inside the scope of the function variable equals 10? This is something that new learners can easily get tripped up on. You can invoke a function, but if it's not tied to a variable, Python sees it for that brief second that it takes to execute this code, and then it's going to forget. It just fades off into the constant amnesia of the machine. What I can do, though, is I can tie the function call to that variable again, and we'll do 2 just to demonstrate the difference, right? We'll do, actually that's probably okay, I don't need to tell the machine to wait. So here we're going to print the value of variable, which is 5, and now in this particular function call, we've got the variable equals new function, right? So now I'm invoking the function, I've got variable 10, and I'm returning the value of var here into that variable. And it should overwrite it. So I should get a 5, and then I should get a 10. Let's check it out. 5, well, hello there, because that executes after that value, right? It's the first thing that the function spits out, and then I get the value 10. And it stays 10. So when you write your functions this way, and it's tied to something that it's going to output, and you have your return statement, then you can override the existing variables that are elsewhere in your program, in your software, right? There are ways to declare variables so that they function outside, and you can manipulate them. Let's say, I don't know, global tree, right? We'll do tree equals redwood, and the global keyword says whatever we're doing inside this function can be accessed by the rest of the program, I believe. So we can do print tree, and look, I'm not getting thrown an error, and if I run it again, I should get redwood down there. There it is, redwood. The downside to the global keyword, though, is that it can be manipulated from anywhere inside your program. For example, if I go tree equals walnut, and I run my debugger again, I get walnut. So even though I have defined the original variable redwood here, I pushed back into the function and I overrode it with this code. So generally, unless you really know what you're doing, you want to avoid that global, the global variables. That's a beware. The last thing that we have, the optional components, are parameters, and I'm already running a little bit long, so I'm going to do this quickly. Inside our parentheses here, we have a space to put parameters, and that allows us to push in a variable or a value from an argument elsewhere in the program. So let me see. I'm going to do, we'll do name, and then we'll do parameters in here just to be very clear. And I'm going to have param1, it doesn't matter, comma param2, and then for param, oops, we'll do, how do I want to do this? We'll do statement 1 equals param1. Now, it's gray because it's not accessed. Nothing is happening, right? We could do print statement 1. Right now, I don't think anything's going to happen. Let's get rid of all the other print commands. We'll just do the function call and see what happens. Get rid of that. Let's get rid of that. Okay, so now we have our very simple function. What's going to happen if I call a function but I don't actually give it an argument? Because in here we have the call and then we have arguments in parentheses. I don't have anything in there. So what's going to happen? Oh, I have an error. I have new function missing 2 required positional arguments, param1 and param2. There are functional arguments, and then there are, positional arguments and keyword arguments. That's outside the scope of this particular quick video. But what I need is a string, probably, because it's a statement. So we'll say, you're beautiful. And we need another one, which is, it could be anything, 5. It doesn't matter. Nothing is being accessed through it, but it shouldn't throw an error, and it should print, you're beautiful. Oh, look, there it is, right? So what I've done, let me simplify this a little bit, the theory here. Get rid of that. When I define my function, I have a single parameter, which is param1. It could be anything. The name does not matter. I could call this apples. As long as this thing matches it, it doesn't matter. It doesn't care. It's like the temporary variable in a for loop. It doesn't matter. It just needs to match. And then I define a new variable, statement 1, according to that, and then I can print it. Right? So I'm pushing data, the data defined here, into my function, and then I'm tying that to a variable and I'm doing something with it. We could do math with this, right? I could say, let's define a new variable. We'll say x equals 5, and we're going to call this the number, just to be really clear about what's going on. And we could do new num equals num times 5, and we're going to return new num. And then in here, we just put x for the variable, right? And we'll do print new function. So whatever the value that gets returned here is, should print out. The num that we're passing in is x, or 5. So it'll be 5 times 5. If I've done this right, and we all understand what we're doing, well, make a quick prediction. What do you think it'll be? 25, right? 25, right there, in case you don't know where to look. So I passed the number 5 into this argument, which reads through this parameter, and then I have a new variable that's multiplying that original number 5 that I passed in by 5. And then I return that new variable and I print it out. I can do the same. This would be the same thing if I did, we'll do y. We'll do y equals, and I don't need the parentheses here, and I can do print y. And I'll run it, and I'll get 25 again. There it is, 25, right? So that is how to call functions, how to pass arguments in and pull them out of parameters. A couple things here just to be aware of. I'm going to collapse this, and I'm just going to get rid of that so we can see. A variable defined or adjusted within a function but not returned to the program gets confined to that function's scope. And that's where sometimes a newbie will get tripped up using functions because they've written a variable and they can't figure out how to access it or get back to it. So just be aware, you either need to define the variable outside, you need to use a global keyword, or you need to return it to the program by tying it to something, like I showed you earlier in the video. And then some practice ideas, because I didn't include these in other videos, and I should have, but try to write some functions that calculate numbers, like I just did with the multiply by 5, that concatenate strings together, like can you take your name as an input and then concatenate that with an @gmail.com or something, and then try to utilize for and while loops inside of functions, because that works, and it can take a really long chunk of your software and compress it down. You can use if-thens, you can use switch cases, really anything I've covered in QuickCode. If you've gotten it, you've practiced it, writing those into functions is a great way to go back and review while also raising the utility of what you're writing. So that's it. That's functions. I ran a little long this time, but it's kind of a complex, tricky thing. There's a lot to go into with that, so hopefully this is just a stepping stone to you understanding and being more comfortable writing functions on your own in order to empower your own software. If you like this kind of video where I go not super deep, but kind of straightforward, head first at a topic, subscribe and do the doodads, and I'll be around in the next couple videos.